Okay, so where we left off yesterday, it was right before you were to go into the meeting after you and Red Zabriskie had found out that you had asbestosis of the lungs.
Right.
And so this is now the day of the meeting that you're supposed to have. And didn't they have a Manville official there discussing asbestos too?
There was nothing but
School board officials?
Yeah, right. So they couldn't believe it what I said. So they said, "Well, now you don't have to worry about working on asbestos. We'll get somebody else." I said, "Why do that?" I said, "So Juan, I'm sorry you have it, but you know what? Since you're gonna have to be working around with asbestos, rather than have to expose new people into it that don't have it, why don't you just continue working on it? We'll give you a 10% raise for hazard."
A hazard pay raise, yeah.
But they refused to do that. So we had Red Zabriskie and myself were the first two to be notified from the LA City School Board. By the time I retired, there was over 176 that had been confirmed they had asbestos in the lungs.
Gotcha.
There's a school, one day, the area director made me mad. And that went to his office, and I never pulled no punches. I told him, "If you back talk to me one more time," I says, "I'm going to have Wilson High School closed completely. That's a 4-story building, a new school, high school."
Mm-hmm.
But they sprayed all the beams and ceiling and everything with asbestos as a preventative for fire.
For fire.
I said, "Yeah, yes, you say it's encapsulated." I said, "But supposing a workman goes in there and accidentally scrapes it, you got asbestos flying."
Right.
So I says, "I'm getting tired of your bull." So we went and hired an attorney. And we got some settlements out of it.
Right.
But my biggest argument was the children that were exposed to it. We don't know how many thousands might come down from that, and they don't ever bother to see what they died of.
Right. The part that the part that I'm missing right here is it was we missed it last night when we were recording this. So when you were at the meeting, and this was at the meeting after they told you that you could eat a cup of asbestos,
Yeah.
and it's perfectly safe. And how did you respond to them?
Oh, no, I went and I told Mike Perez went into the area director the day of the meeting. And he says, "I finally found somebody that's going to come and talk to us on the safety issue." So Borneman says, "Yeah." He says, "Who's that?" He says, "The main person from Cal OSHA is coming in regards to asbestos because somebody here made a statement and we could eat a cup of it. It wouldn't hurt us." So the meeting started, and the guy told us who he was. And he says, "I understand one of you made the statement that the supervisor had told you that you could eat a cup of asbestos and it wouldn't hurt you." Mike Perez says, "It was me, and Juan was the one that made the phone call." And he told us, the supervisor, he says, "That was a stupid thing to say. You can take one particle of asbestos and it gets stuck to your lungs and you've got it." So later on, I couldn't work around asbestos or anything, and they tried to make it hard for me. So I finally decided to get retired.
Right.
So I retired in 1986,
I remember.
March the 29th.
Yeah.
So that ended my career with the school board.
Right. But didn't you take a loaf of bread and a cup of asbestos and some mustard to somebody and tell them if it's so safe to go ahead and make a sandwich and eat it?
Yeah.
Who was that? Who did you do that to?
To the area director. I says, you say it's not harmful? I told the supervising plumber and also the area director, here's a sandwich, asbestos and mustard, and go ahead and eat it. So I was well known. First, because I never took no shit off of nobody. I knew my work. I wasn't afraid to work. One time they told me to put a test on a boiler without what they call stay rods. A boiler goes in by sections,
Right.
and the sections are compressed with the hydraulic. Then you put like a long bolt with a nut on each side and tighten it to keep it together.
Right.
Well, they didn't have any 7/8 inch nuts. So my supervisor told me one day, he says, well, go ahead and put the test on it. I says, it will not hold. He says, I know it will. You go ahead and put a test on it. So I went back to, of all places for this to happen, was in the offices where this safety committee, the safety used to work. So I went up to the boiler room, and one of the carpenters was there. He says, how come you're so mad, Juan? And I told him, I said, because them assholes, they're telling me that they put the test on a boiler without the nuts, that we don't need it. He said, then why do it? I said, why do it? I said, I'm going to tell you why I'll do it. Supposing I put a test on it without the nuts, and just by a miracle, the boiler stays together. It's me now that's in trouble. So to put a hydrostatic test on a boiler, the board is it's 1.5 times the working pressure,
Right.
and the boilers were 15 pounds. So it was around 47 pounds of pressure that I had to put on it per square inch to see if it would hold.
Mm-hmm.
I was on top of it. I was putting the pressure, and the pressure got up to 6 pounds. And it opened up. The pressure of the water threw me up,
Mm-hmm.
and I landed back on top of the boiler, and the boiler shut tight. I got off. The plumber right away called the office and told them what happened. And they all came, Borneman and the supervisors, and even the general supervisor for safety,
Mm-hmm.
which was in the same building. He was there, and he was telling me, there's no way you could have had only 6 pounds. He said, you probably hit about 100 and something pounds pressure.
Right.
I said, the pipes here only hold 50 pounds pressure.
Right.
I said, but I'll tell you what I do, you son of a bitch. I'm going to put the boiler back together again without the nuts, the way I did it, the way they told me to do it. And I want you to get on top of the boiler, and I want you to open the valve slowly, and you see the pressure.
Right.
And see at what pounds it comes off.
Right.
He said, well, I'm not going to do that. I said, well, then you're a damn goose liver. I said, you ought to practice what you preach. You're telling me that it'll hold and that I had too much pressure. I said, you're mistaken. They called the company, and the company said, yes, you definitely have to have the stay rods in there. They're put in there.
That's the purpose of them.
Yeah. So after that, I worked a few more months, and then I forgot I hurt my back or something.
You wound up having to have major back surgery.
I finally wound up getting back surgery. So I figured, well, I'm having too many accidents. I might as well retire.
I remember those days when your back was that bad. I remember us taking a trip. We were supposed to take a trip to Hearst Castle.
Yeah, and I had to turn back.
You had to turn around because you were in too much pain.
Yes, we got to Santa Barbara, I think.
And that is probably the only other time I've ever seen you in that much pain was probably when you were in the hospital when when your esophagus was ruptured. When you went in there.
Well, yeah.
That's the only other time I've ever seen you in that much pain or discomfort. It wasn't just pain. It was just there was nothing you could do to be comfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was my experience with the school board.
Oh, there's a lot more stories there. I remember one year, and this was probably Christmas. It was the Christmas party of 1988, I think. And Sam was working for the school board by then. He was in the tool room.
Right.
And you and Memo had come into the area, and I was off from school, so I was there hanging out.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what supervisor it was. But he introduced himself to me, and I said, "Oh, it's very nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you from my grandfather." And some of the other guys that were there, they knew who I was, and they were listening, and they were paying attention, so they stopped what they were doing. And he goes, "Oh, is that right?" He goes, well, who's your grandfather? I go, Juan Garcia Jr. And I'm telling you, his face froze. It just stopped like, oh, shit. And some of the other guys that were there, they go, yeah, it's another Garcia. Watch what you're doing over there. You don't want to piss him off either.
Yeah, that's right. But I'm going to have to go back in time. When I was a little boy, my grandfather on my father's side used to take me out into the woods, and he used to tell me, "Mijo, see this wood here? You can eat that if you're hungry.
Mm-hmm.
You see this wood here?" He says, "Don't touch it." He says, "If you get a cut or a burn, look for an oak tree and take some of the bark and take it with a rock and crush it and get the oil and put that over the wound. That will heal it." So he used to teach me a lot. Later on in life, I found out, well, all my grandparents, all my ancestors, they were horsemen.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't a single horse that ever bucked my grandfather off a horse. He was a good horse rider. I was always under the assumption that I was Mexican.
Mm-hmm.
But my grandfather used to tell me, "Mijo, you're Indian, you're Lipan." But when you're a child, you don't care.
No.
So I had always stuck to me, but I didn't pay too much attention. I grew up, got married, started having kids, then the grandchildren. And I remember one day I went to visit you in Fresno, and you were working on the computer, and I asked you, Ross, can you dig up the Lipan Apaches? Or can you dig up the Indian people from the United States? I says, and you did something on the computer, and the map came out, and it showed the Apaches, Sioux,
Mm-hmm.
all the tribes, all the nations. See, people are under the assumption that all the Indians are Apaches.
Or they're just two or three different tribes, two or three
But
nations.
no, within the Apache, there are several. There's about
Tribes.
18 tribes, but there is only 7 nations. The Apache is the biggest nation there is. The Sioux is another one. The Seminole is another one. The Cherokee is another one. There's, I think, 7 or 8 nations. So anyway, I asked you, can you dig up the Lipan Apaches? So you put it on, and it came out, the map of Texas and Lipan Apaches. I said, can you give me some information on that? And you push some button, and the thing started to print and print and print and print, and gave me 2 different reports of the Lipan Apaches. And that's where I found out our roots, but I still didn't do anything about it. I came home, I remember, and I read it. It was pretty interesting. And then I put it in the drawer and forgot about it. About 2 years later, I was going through my drawer and I read it again, and there was a telephone number. So I called the telephone number and I told them, I said, I don't know if it's true or not. My grandfather used to tell me when I was a young man, about 6 years old at the most, that I was Indian, but I spoke Spanish. I, I said, I don't know whether I am or not. She said, well, I'm going to get our genealogist to ask you some questions. She'll call you tomorrow. And sure enough, she called the next day, and she told me who it was, Alma, I know she's part Garcia also, because she said, we're relatives. She says, you say you think you're a native. I said, yes. He says, do you know, what's your father's name? I told him Juan Garcia. He says, what's your mother's name? Josefa Rendon Garcia. He said, well, do you happen to know who your grandmother was on your mother's side? I said, yes. She was Maria Cortinas Vasquez. But when she married my grandfather, Salvador Rendon, she dropped the Vasquez and became a Rendon. How about on your mother's side, on your father's side? I said, well, my grandfather's name was Sosenes Garcia, and my grandmother's name was Melesia Rivera, and they were from San Diego, Texas. He says, I remember that my grandmother used to tell me, your great grandfather is a famous general, and his name was Ignacio Cortina. We, she says, oh, you give me enough information, I'll get back to you in a day or two and give you the information I find. Well, she called me the next day and she said, Mr. Garcia, I got some news for you. I says, what's that? She says, you are full-blooded Lipan. I says, what? He says, yes, you are. I'm going to send you out a pedigree where it's going to give the ancestry. And I have it on my father's side. I can trace it back to 1740. On my mother's side, I can trace it down to the 1600s. The Rendon were Lipan Apaches. The Riveras were Lipan Apaches. Garcias were Lipan Apaches. But the reason that we have Spanish surnames was so the story was told, and I've been reading, when the missionaries were coming from Mexico into Texas back in the 1700s, they would come to little small encampments. Well, the natives are very inquisitive. They never seen a man with red hair and blue eyes. They never seen a man with yellow hair and green eyes. They haven't seen a man white. So the Judas priests would take out the Bible and start teaching them the Bible. Well, being inquisitive, they would tell a friend of theirs, and a friend of theirs would tell another that pretty soon there was a big crowd listening to the Judas priests talk about the Bible. Well, they got more and more interested that the Judas priest said, well, you are so good Christians now, we have to build a temple for the God. And that's the reason that you find all those nations around Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. In reality, they were actually built by slaves because they held the Indians kind of captive. And they said, oh, you're so good Christians, from now on, your name is not going to be, and my name is Eagle Eye. Your name is not going to be Eagle Eye no more. From now on, you're going to be known as Juan, after St. John. They give us aristocratic names or names of saints. He said, now in order to be a very, very good Christian, you're going to have to give up your language and accept the Spanish language, and you're going to have to give up your culture and accept the Mexican culture. That is why we lost our language and we lost our culture. But now we're working on it. That I do have my tribal number, and we're growing in numbers because there's no telling how many thousands of Texans are walking out and around there with the assumption that they are Mexicans, when in reality they are natives. But since a Spanish surname was put on us, we don't know that, so we go by either Gonzalez, Lopez, Trevino, whatever it is. When in reality, we may be Lipan Apaches. So we have to work on it to see if we can get federally recognized.
Right.
Because I say, if you're a native born in the United States, that means all natives born in the United States
Right.
or should be federally recognized.
But it's up to the federal government to recognize the tribe, and that's
Yes.
and the big thing about the federal recognition is that is what actually gets the federal benefits and
Federal
services
benefits,
to kick in.
land and
All that kicks in.
reservations and everything. Yes.
That's the important thing.
That's the reason that they're holding back. We had a powwow. I was reading in 2006. A powwow is a circle, and all different tribes from all different nations can come and sit outside the circle with their drums. They Before the Sharma starts the ritual, he burns
Sage.
which is a sacred weed. And he goes around the circle and he blesses all the circle and the natives and everybody that's there that wants to be blessed. From that moment on, if you're not a native, you're not allowed to cross into the circle unless a native tells you, come on, let's go with me. Because then you were invited. So they were having a powwow, and the agent for the Bureau of Indian Affairs walked into the circle and took the sacred feathers from our pastors, which are like a medicine, many mistake, and their eagle feathers. And he fought it, and the agent told him that he could face up to 25 years in prison for having the feathers. Well, he was scared, but anyway, he went and one of the attorneys offered his services to help us. Here last year, we finally got a ruling that the Bureau of Indian Affairs didn't have no businesses going into the sacred circle. They did not have no business taking our sacred feathers away from us. So we won the case. To me, that's a feather in the cap because that moves us one step closer to get to where we're federally recognized. I just talked to my nephew, who's the vice president of New Mexico University in Alamogordo, and he got another email from Robert Soto saying that the Bureau of Indian Affairs is going to return all the feathers back. So that's a feather in our cap. But we still have to go a long way.
Oh yeah.
And they don't want to give you a federally recognized, even though people don't know this. A lot of the heroes that died in the Alamo were actually Lipan Apaches, but they had a Spanish surname. Yet there's a monument right in front of the Alamo, and all you find is Crockett, Travis, Bonham, Bowie, and there's a couple of Seguin. One of them is Seguin, and there's a town named Seguin because he was the one that went to Houston up in, I think, in Goliath to tell them that they were being overrun. So Houston told him, well, stay here with us. And he says, no. He says, I have to go back to the Alamo and bury my dead. So he went back to the Alamo and buried all the heroes, all the Texans that got killed in the battle. But Bowie, Bonham, and Crockett, they were a bunch of drunks. And they married Mexican women to get access to the land that they have. A lot of people don't know that. Bowie was one of them. He married a Mexican woman to gain the land. So that's about it.
That's it for now. We'll stop right there.